Let's talk some sports, baby.
Taken by Iguodala. Iguodala to Curry. Back to Iguodala. Up for the layup. Oh, blocked by Jones.
And remember, make tomorrow better than today, and make today better than yesterday. And you know what we gonna do? We gonna holler at you until next time, baby.
All right, guys, let's wrap up tonight in college football. The Big Ten made a pretty big decision that could shape the 2020 college football season this week. They announced that all sports will operate under a conference-only model for the season. This has prompted the ACC to follow suit, and we believe the Pac-12 as well tonight. And it's generally thought that all Power 5 conferences are going to adopt the rule for the season. This change is meant to limit geographical travel in the world of COVID. So, for example, Ohio State, who was set to open the season on the road at Oregon, that's not happening now. There's no word on historic out-of-conference rivalries like Florida State, Clemson, South Carolina, and others, but we do know that this decision will shake up an already dubious-looking college football season. So, Drink, what sort of effects is this decision going to have on the season and on the playoff?
Well, let's call it what it is. It's going to have a lot of effects. I think the big effect, the effect that we care about as the masses, is like the cross-conference Power Five games. The for the smaller schools, the as we call them, the cupcake games. But one of the effects I always look at is how a lot of these colleges, they depend on their football programs. You don't have many Dukes and Kansas and Kentucky's out there that depend on a basketball program rather than the football program. So listen, if you was cashing $500,000 checks and $250,000 checks and all this in the past, you ain't getting one this year. So you might as well shut that program down because you're out of here, buddy. You're not getting a freebie. Let's talk about the group of 5 teams. What about those guys? Well, they usually use these bigger Division I teams to get, more shine on them. UCF, of that nature. Sorry, that ain't happening. Look, let me tell you, this conference only thing has made the group of 5 so damn irrelevant this year. Like I don't care to see none of their games this year. If they're not playing Power 5, I don't care to see none of them this year at all. And then, like I said, let's talk about those big time cross conference games. Your Michigans at Washington, Ohio State at Oregon, your games like that, even down to your Wisconsin versus Notre Dame's. And, big effect, big money. It's a big deal all the way around, but we have to remember the first and foremost, the most important thing is these kids' health. We don't want them to put their health at risk just for our entertainment. If they don't feel comfortable doing it, then don't do it. I can sit here and, crap on them all I want, but at the end of the day, as long as the kid's healthy, that's all that matters. And another thing I want, listen, teams, how can I put this? You know what? I ain't even gonna. I was gonna get real disrespectful, but I'm you know what I'm saying. Like my mama told me, if you ain't got nothing nice to say, don't say nothing at all. So I'm gonna go ahead and plead the fifth on that. But it's gonna be very interesting. I'm very interested to see these conference only games. And I always say this. This is 2020 is not a year to experiment. You can just get away with whatever you want to get away with in 2020. So why not see how this shakes out for all these conferences to see how it feels to play, especially for the SEC. This is a conference that's been talking about playing more conference games anyway. Where this year we're gonna find out how you really feel about that when you play more. So it should make for a very unique situation, a very unique experience, and I'm here for it. So let's get on with it.
That's a great point you ended off on, and I'll start there. If we're not playing out of conference games, are we just cutting off that part of the schedule, or are we going to add in more conference games? Because I would like to still see a full schedule. You got to think about it, most of these conferences are, 13, 14, in that range of how many teams they have. So they could still play a 12-game season and not play their conference opponents more than once. That's one of the things I'm looking at, and I don't know if that's being discussed yet, but I would definitely consider it. And I think who this affects, and I'll get to the playoffs eventually, but to me, the Pac-12, the Big 12, and the ACC, and by ACC I mean Clemson, they're the ones that are gonna. I think they're gonna feel this because when you look at those conferences, they would seem to be the ones that rely on those out-of-conference matchups the most as resume builders because, I mean, the depth of those conferences in comparison to the Big Ten and SEC it's not the same. So to me, the margin of error for those teams, for those conferences and Clemson decreases tremendously. Think about this. Last season, we talk about how pathetic the ACC was, and a byproduct of that was Clemson's resume. I mean, we talked about it week after week. Clemson cannot lose because they don't have the quality wins to balance out that loss and say, well, they took this L. You know it's not going to be a good L because the schedule is terrible. And then we look at the schedule in its totality. The best win was Texas A&M. And Texas A&M, I mean, that was Alabama's best win either. And why you think Alabama? I mean, Alabama. But anyway, look, Clemson's gonna be in the same position they were in last year. I don't think they can afford to lose a game. The only chance they have, and I don't think this is going to be enough, Notre Dame, I would say, will, in a de facto way, be part of the ACC as an independent since they play in the ACC and other sports. So I think that's how Notre Dame would have a schedule, and Clemson has got to be first in line saying, we need to play Notre Dame. We cannot afford to not play Notre Dame. We need somebody of relevance on this schedule. And then in the Pac-12 and the Big 12, I think they're sort of in the same situation. I can see Oklahoma doing the same old, just running up and down the Big 12 as they normally do. But they won't have a chance to get any non-conference wins to help kind of boost that resume. So one loss might do it for them. And in the Pac-12, I think it's going to be the same old story. I mean, you'll have Oregon will be solid as usual. We'll see what happens with Utah and Southern Cal and some of these other schools. But at the end of the day, I think the Pac-12 will trip over itself repeatedly as we can customarily expect them to do. And in the end, the playoffs, when we talk about resumes, it's going to be interesting because we won't have those early season matchups to kind of get a gauge of how's the Big 12 stacking up against the Big 10. Does the ACC compare in any way to the Pac-12? I mean, we got to start. These are some of the questions we will have less defined answers to, and I think reputation is going to play a big role. I think it's a very real possibility where either the SEC or Big Ten, and more likely the SEC, if there's a year we've seen it before where a conference can get two teams in. I think this is a year where definitely we could see that happen. And I think if things fall a certain way, we could see two SEC schools and two Big Ten schools. I think that is a real possibility we could see.
Yeah, it's going to definitely be interesting. I think the two things that NCAA has got to get on top of, one is the amount of games that are going to be played in the rivalry games, because you're going to quickly run into this problem. Because right now we have a schedule set of, hey, everybody plays, their X amount of games. And remember, even a few years ago, we had a slight problem where the Big 12 wasn't playing a conference championship. So they had one less game to stack up on their resumes, and then they had to force another game in. They had to create a game basically to play. But because I think about some of these rivalries that are very close by, Florida State, why is it okay for Florida to go to Kentucky or go to Nashville and play Vanderbilt when Florida State, you could throw a football at Florida State from where they are, or Clemson, South Carolina, or Georgia Tech, so I really hope that these ADs can get together and they can say, hey, we're still going to have these big games that are geographically we wouldn't travel any more than we would anyway. But then it opens so much more of a can of worms. So let's say in the SEC, Florida's really good, Alabama's really good. Both teams are 7-1 at the end of the conference schedule, but then Florida gets to go play Florida State, who let's just say is decent, not great, like we expect. And then Florida gets an extra win. Well, if they're fighting for the fourth playoff spot, who gets it? How do you make those kind of decisions when some teams get to schedule an extra game? And what if one conference says, well, we'll fill up all 12 games with conference games, and another conference goes, no, we're not? Because I've heard the Big Ten's already said we're not going to fill in the games. We're just going to cut the non-conference ones off. But it's still early in the process. We'll have to see. But how does Notre Dame factor in? How does does the ACC cut an ACC game off to fill them in? Do we add an extra game? You know what I mean? Like, you can run down these scenarios and they all just look like, oh God, what a dumpster fire that could be. Is this the year? Does the Pac-12 just get written off automatically before the season starts? Because what if everyone's undefeated? Even they are they the one that gets cut automatically? How do we know if they're better than them? Because like what y'all said, and then, what happens if one team gets a bunch of COVID issues and they lose their starting quarterback, their starting wide receiver, and 3 defensive players, but that's their only loss? Do we give them an asterisk? You know what I mean? So I don't know. Like you said, the playoff is going to be really questionable. They might just cancel it altogether. Who knows what they're going to do with that? But this could get really messy really fast. So I'm kind of excited to see the conference games. At the same time, I'm like, there's a lot of wormy, questionable territory here we're in.
And think about this in the realignments of some of these conferences lately. Think about the outlandish traveling that takes place on a regular basis, and in a coronavirus environment. Think about Colorado in the Pac-12 having to go to the West Coast pretty much for all their games. How about Texas A&M from the Big 12 to the SEC? What about when they go to Florida or South Carolina or halfway across the country, and then Nebraska to Maryland or Rutgers? I mean, some of in a coronavirus environment with these realigned conferences. Oh, and then how about your ACC teams with Boston College and Syracuse coming in to play Miami or Florida State? Some of these realigned conferences in this environment, conference-only games, it makes sense up front, but when you factor in the reshaping of conferences, I don't know. Now it looks a little bit more questionable now.